This is what it is, right? Engels, yeah?
Yes, English. We're live.
Yes.
Hi,
Oh my
everyone.
God.
Thanks for joining us. Jeff, welcome. Would you
Thanks.
like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Robin. I'm Jev Suchoi. I'm a fellow Microsoft MVP of Robin. I specialize on Microsoft Azure architecture, security, and automation. And I am interested in picking technology, picking it apart actually, seeing how it works, and then see what we can do with it. So if you think back from your kids' days, I'm the kid that got a toy and then broke it because he wanted to open it up and see how everything works inside it. So I learned from that. It's quite difficult to break Azure, although sometimes it happens. I consider that an achievement. But yeah, I'm still doing that.
Nice, nice. All right. So, yeah, let's dive right into it. Right? Let's get this show on the road. So today's topic is naming Azure resources following the perfect naming convention, right? And we're going to be finalizing that today by showcasing what you can do if your organization is not completely ready for a
Yeah,
naming convention.
exactly.
All
That's
right,
that's that's gonna be our final point.
good man. I There we go.
Okay. So I think we talked about this a couple of months back, I guess. We're like, okay, how can we do a naming convention? I explained to you some of the stuff on one of the conventions. Um, but before we get into that final topic where we actually are able to do quick, cool display names, let's start with the original. And this is something I've blogged a while back about. I think it's still the same. It holds the same truth for quite some time. And the first one is okay. So we're moving into Azure, or you already are in Azure. You're going for version 2, 3, 4, or 5, because I mean, you should. Microsoft Cloud is ever evolving, so should your environment. Whether you like hard stamp it with a version or not, you still definitely should evolve. And you're wondering, okay, what's the point of the naming convention? And I'm not gonna read the whole thing out, but just to give you a couple of pointers. So why is it so important? Well, easiest thing is to reduce the effort needed to read. However, there's a little bit of a but here, which we'll get into the next couple of minutes. Well, another one is it helps to focus on other stuff. You can actually focus on your code, on your infrastructure's code, on your scripting, or mm, instead of looking at object names or resource names, etc. You can actually, it helps you to remove the noise and focus on the functionality of your script or infrastructure code files, Bicep, Terraform, whatever you like to use. Um, I think it also helps a lot with refactoring. So because it's standardized, it's quite easy to find things. And there are a couple of more topics like that. I think the final one is the most important one, is to provide better understanding in case of reuse or after a long interval of time. So you just go back. You have your naming convention, by the way, must be documented. That goes for everything. Everything as code, including your documentation. So when you wrote the code, you wrote the documentation as well, right? So if you go back, you read the naming convention, and it should start make sense to you. Also, if you hand over to a different team, hand over the naming convention, and it should definitely help in the same setup. But yeah, there are more topics important. Oh, I'm sorry. Uh, Check them out, or if you haven't read them by now. And then on top of why it's important, this is crucial. The 10 Commandments, and the first one is names used should be in correct American English. So I had a lot of conversations on Stack Overflow, for example. A lot of passionate Brits, I guess. They're like, no, American English is wrong. Why are you doing this? But there's a really good post there. where there's a huge amount of people. I think it's like 5, maybe even 8 years old or something, even are probably archived by now. That explains this in a lot of details with a lot of pros and cons. But I try to um, grab the core essence of that post, is because it's established as the international language for programming. All books, all uh, resources, everything comes in American English first, and then is derived from that in other different languages. So why not standardize that towards the rest of technology? Well, the second one is use commonly accepted short forms. For example, API, don't write it out. I mean, this is one is super obvious. That's why I put it in. And at least I haven't seen anybody doing it. So I guess that's a good thing. Application programming interface. Most people that probably even forgot where it stood for, right? Third one is use intuitive, familiar terminology where possible. And this one is quite difficult to achieve, especially if you have the business language. So, for example, if you've done work in any kind of public sector, they love to abbreviate things to 3-letter acronyms. They don't always mean what you think they mean. So this is a bit of a careful one. If you're gonna name things, make sure to name them properly, and not to have them confused with your business. But yeah, that's that one. The next one is the fourth one, is use the same name and term for the same concept. Same thing is can be difficult to achieve, but try to use it across subject domains at least. Fifth one is something developers, at least for my developer background, way back when I was actually trying to do something called C#, we had overloading, which means you use different names for different concepts. So try to avoid that. I think overloaded function is the same function with the same name that could use the same that had actually slightly different logic in it or purpose. And correct me if I am wrong there, but I that's what I remember from way back.
What
Um,
does, can you make that more specific? 0.5. So that means that you, if you write a function that does something, that you use that name for every time you use a function that has the same purpose. So you don't.
yeah. So
Okay.
if you have so let's say we have a purpose test name, since we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about names. Um, Try to make it as standardized as possible. If possible, give it a bit more context than test name, to make it more specific. And when you start using that within your setup, continue using it just for that functionality. Don't
Mm-hmm.
try to reuse that name for something that's for a logic that's completely different but related to testing, for example. So if you have a test name, a function name, or test script name, don't try to use it for something else. Add some logic, because what happens, and this is for example in PowerShell, I see this a lot. What happens is a function is created by a team to test a file name, let's say a file name, and that has a quite decent logic code wise. So when another requirement comes in where we need to not just test the file name but let's say an object name, is very tempting, because you have already a lot of logic, to simply add that little bit of functionality, which is like 5 lines of text, and reuse that function for that as well. And have two functions with the same name, but for example, in different folders. So when you load that function into your context, you don't know exactly which one you've loaded. And I've seen this happen in some environments, which makes it super confusing. And that can be resolved by simply giving them separate names. And if you don't want to create technical debt, you pick up again that core functionality of that test file name function, you make it as generic function again and call it in your separate functions, one called test object name and the other one called test file name. Does that make sense?
So be consistent. That's basically what you're saying. If you use one name for something, then keep using it for that specific thing, and don't use it for other things, right?
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And if that topic isn't clear, and this is not stated here explicitly, but this is what I if there are people watching that worked with me in the past, I hope they do. I saw some very cool names, familiar names in the
same
list.
Here.
I'm really hoping they do. But they know that I always remind everybody, document. If you're unsure, document. So create a list of definitions in your documentation. Say this, with this terminology, we mean this. So if somebody comes in, new team member, or you're going to hand over the piece of script or software to another team, everybody's on the same page, literally.
Yeah, I see that often as well. For example, naming your managed identity from an Azure resource perspective, right? So we're talking about a naming convention that goes beyond your Azure resources, right? In the 10 commandments. So also when you write code and camel case, snake case, usually there are standards already defined for each and every language, right?
Yeah.
But what I see, for example, is that, one colleague of mine sometimes names the managed identity MI dash, and then so on and so forth, right? What I do, for example, is follow what Microsoft states in their documentation, which says ID hyphen and so on and so forth, right? So they give you, Microsoft already gives you like abbreviations, examples for certain resources. I try to follow these, but sometimes there's some resources are missing, right? So then you need to define like, oh, if I create a SQL database, do I put SQL then, SQL? Do I DB SQL, SQL DB? etc., right? And yeah, you need to document these as well. That's what you're getting at, right, Jeff?
Exactly. So if there's or if you're naming something completely separate, that's, for example, very specific to your client or very specific to the business your client is in, or even, I think I really like your example where Microsoft doesn't always give you a good an example because their documentation sometimes is also some delays. So I just brought up, by the way, on the screen for everybody to see. This is the managed identity, and this is what I would definitely advise. If you're using Microsoft in this case, go to the abbreviations for resource types, and if it's not there, document it. Because if Microsoft at a certain point comes in and they have a slightly different name for this, at least you have yours documented and you can continue going on. Because, and we're going to touch this topic with the other with the other post later on, but a lot of with regards to naming and Azure, there's a lot of stuff immutable. So once you name it, that's it. It's gonna stay there for its whole duration of its life cycle. So even though at a certain point it will not align with the Microsoft way, at least you have a definition and maybe even an explanation saying, hey, when we created this, it didn't exist, so we had to. That helps a lot as well, especially if you have like reiterations or analysis or reviews or whatever on your environment.
Which you can also do is, but it's next level, right? Is contribute to the documentation. So then, if that resource is missing in that list, then you just you create a pull request where you add that resource, and then you can still follow Microsoft's documentation for your project, right? But
I really like that point. For some reason, that didn't came up to me, which I should be ashamed for. But yeah, really good point. Yes. So contribute to documentation. I'm gonna make an 11th commandment: contribute to Microsoft documentation.
All right, nice, good. I'll stop interrupting you.
Yeah, no problem. I love the interruption. I mean, it gives me additional viewpoint, and we get to the cool stuff as well. Like, hey, different ideas. So I think we covered this one a little bit already. Avoid overly general names that are ambiguous in larger ecosystem, like calling something test. I've seen that as well. A lot of PowerShell scripts called test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4. It's like, okay, you either have a very good naming convention on what this means with some definition somewhere, which I need to find, or this is just easily thrown up stuff. So
one of these frustrated commits, right? At one point, just trying to figure things out, and you have everything set up in a GitOps way, and blah blah blah, right? So to deploy it, you need to actually commit it. So at one point, like, okay, try this, right? And again, try this, try this, and what about this, right? So you get these, these empty.
Yeah, I understand. In my dev environment or in my playground environment, I sometimes have. I disagree with Microsoft. Let's try this. These kind of commits. And then somewhere it ends up either Microsoft is right, sad face, but I only keep that in my playground environment. Ideally, if you want to set up naming convention or conventions in a really advanced way, and you have a decent sized team, I would even advise having a look at standardization of your commit messages, because those exist. There's a really, really good write-ups and blogs on those topics.
Absolutely. Or use GitHub Copilot to that's possible as well. So GitHub Copilot looks at your code and then it comes up with a commit message for you. So anyway.
Yeah, in my opinion, if it doesn't like the code, what I asked for this actually as a bit of a gimmick request, that it gives you shame memes or something in return if it doesn't, if it considers it not up to standard. But for me, I found it funny. The feedback I got is like, well, we need to make sure that it's very inclusive. I agree with that. So, but it was a good, funny idea to suggest. So, jumping back, carefully consider the names that make conflicts in programming languages, etc. For example, PowerShell has approved verbs that you can use, and there are some reserved words as well, which they don't want you to use because it's used in the default functionality provided. So make sure you don't overlap that. And this one you just mentioned already, ensure the chosen case type. So my favorite one as a foodie is the kebab case, just because it has the word kebab in it. But yeah, snake case, camel case, Pascal case, whatever. There's, like you said, every language has their own system. Every team has their own system. I don't think there's a really wrong or right here, personally. It's what you want as a team. But keep in mind that you will not maintain and build that code or script base forever. So you're going to need to hand it over. So because of that, try to reference it to either Microsoft standardization, if you're using the Microsoft Cloud in this case, or like the programming language or the scripting language standardization. It will definitely help with the quality of your scripts and code. And that's the whole point of the naming convention as well, is to help with quality. So
absolutely. We have a couple of questions as well. I do have some issue because we're streaming on LinkedIn and on YouTube, and somehow LinkedIn is always giving me issues. But okay, let's start with the one that I don't see in the streaming software, so I cannot pull it up, but I can read it out loud. So it's from our previous well-esteemed colleague called Mark. Hi, Mark. So Mark asks, curious, do you think, or is the cloud maturity experience of an organization a factor when creating a naming convention?
Theoretically, it shouldn't be. Practically, it probably is. So, and let me set a little bit of a scene and correct me if I misunderstood you in this case or not. In all my previous experience in organizations that are still on entry level maturity with regards to automation, cloud at scale, etc. I get a lot of resistance towards a naming convention that is not easily readable for human interaction. And we'll get to the case how I see that in hopefully well, we will get definitely there in the next topic. But from that perspective, I would say theoretically it shouldn't be, but practically I did experience it where the maturity level is entry level. A naming convention is quite difficult to establish, especially when it's not focused on human readability by default. And we have, that's the whole cool thing about our final topic for today is how there's a bit of functionality that is semi hidden away but still documented by Microsoft, which we can use to combine that. So I like the question. We hopefully at the end of this stream you will be able to see we can still, with this trick or functionality actually, we can still start with the highly matured naming convention while the organization is still yet growing into it. I hope I answered that question.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, I copy pasted it and then I pulled it on screen, so it
yeah.
was not my question. I have one more, and I think that's an interesting one as well. So that's from Thomas. Thomas is a colleague of mine.
Hi, Thomas.
So a very good guide. Thank you. Just a short question. Does it make sense to define an exemption for key vaults or storage accounts by Azure limitations? So maximum characters, right? Storage accounts cannot have any hyphens in it, for example, or dashes, whatever you want to call them, etc.
I would include them as exceptions in my, well, it depends a bit how you look at it. If you purely look from a naming convention standard, it would be an exception. But because you can't have, I mean, unless you're in Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all, you can't have a one naming convention that will rule all cases. That's impossible. So what I usually do, I set it up and say, well, if hyphens are not allowed, then we remove them, but we still use the same cadence for the naming convention. And the same thing with length. The focus of, and we'll get there, I really promise we'll get there in the next blog post topic. The focus of the naming convention that I consider perfect is to reduce it to be as small as possible, that it will fit. And again, viewers, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I thought 14 characters is the smallest one is that resources have. There's, I believe, one resource that's really limited to 14 characters, maybe 12, but I thought 14. So trying to fit into that. And when you create that naming convention, this is something you need to think about. What is the smallest possible allowed name of a resource or whatever you're creating the naming convention for? And is that going to be something I'm going to try to fit into? If that's not the case, how am I going to handle the exception? But try to limit the number of exceptions to the least possible amount. Because if you have a naming convention and 50 exceptions, then probably the naming conventions is not very well. Because the naming convention should support you in all kinds of at-scale operations, so automation, scripting, etc. And if you have to program and maintain 50 exceptions, that's a lot of work. So I'm pretty sure that and there's no golden rule here how much you should have, but at least as possible. If you have like less than 10, I would say that sounds like more of a better naming convention than one that has 50 or 60 exceptions. And I would definitely see if you can reconsider. And again, you do this iteratively. So when we came first, because again, the naming convention that you see here is co-creation of a lot of people. I just wrote it down. Some of them I can actually see on LinkedIn in the chat. So that's very cool. That contributed to this. We created this together. And we did this iteratively. So we tried a couple of approaches. it didn't work. So we iteratively created what we have right now, which we find quite a solid one. That's why I was daringly enough made the post called the perfect Azure naming convention.
So does that also address like naming scopes? Because some resources like a key vault needs to be globally unique, I believe. Could be I'm wrong. Maybe it's
Yeah.
unique within a region, depending on the
I
URL
think
that
it's
you
in a
use.
region, but storage accounts are globally unique, for example.
Exactly.
So,
It's
yes, this is definitely something that I try out, that we try out, that I try out in teams that we're working on. Is okay. Let's apply it to the most common resources and see what happens.
all right. Makes sense.
So, test it. So quickly going through the rest is like ensure the chosen name. And again kebab. I'm getting hungry already, and it's not even 6 o'clock. So avoid using organizational structures, departments. This is a very important one. Organizations, especially enterprises, merge, reorganize consistently. If you're gonna name something an abbreviation on an organization, on a unit or department, unless it's probably finance or something, or HR, although I've even seen those being renamed.
People ops, yeah.
People ops, yeah, exactly. It's a good one. Thank you. Don't do that. There's no point in adding that. So, and the last one we talked about this was, well, I think this is the strongest one. Assume the names are immutable. If you work from that assumption, you'll get the strongest naming convention possible.
Nice. It got me thinking about management groups as well, right? What you often see is that, okay, you have a display name or a name, and then you have the ID, right? And
Yes.
normally people just, okay, display name is, for example, whatever, department, HR, right? And then the ID is also HR. But then you need to rename the department, and you can change the name, but you cannot change the ID.
Exactly.
Right. So when was it? Azure Lowlands, two fellow Belgian MVPs had a session called the A files, and there they showed that they used randomly generated IDs for the ID. So they just generated a GUID and added that to the ID. So then you can leverage that in your automations and your code and whatever. And then if you need to rename it because it makes sense from an reorganization perspective, then you can just change the display name. So you don't have to go into all your code and change everything and stuff like that.
Exactly. And I mean, if I could, I could name them GUIDs, generated GUIDs, I would. But that's such a high level part of automation. Most companies will not agree with that. Maybe with the trick that we're going to show later, that could be the case. But most companies still think, okay, we do need to have our operators at least have some kind of understanding of what that terminology means. So the perfect naming convention is for me also the one that gets as close as possible to that GUID.
Yeah, nice. It was, by the way, Wim and Misha. So who
Awesome.
presented that? I was like, whoa, okay, so
I haven't
simple
seen
solution,
it, so
but yeah, man, it was very very nice.
I'm gonna definitely look up if they have something, a recording or a blog post about it, because I really like that. So jumping in, the perfect naming convention. That's what she said. So we touched a couple of the topics already here. So proper naming convention should cater automation. So it should treat cloud infrastructure as cattle, not pets. And it might be a bit of a crude example here. Pets, we love them. We give them real names. I heard you. I think you have a dog, right, Robin?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think your dog is called DSG-S-001 or something.
No, it's not one of Elon Musk's kids, right? So,
I mean,
his name is Bobby. Yeah, very original.
Let's quickly hang on. Where did I hit the actual image? Do I have it somewhere? Yeah, let's quickly see. yeah, this is not your dog, right?
No, 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 no.
Cattle is more in this direction. So treat your infrastructure like that. There are many instances of your infrastructure. So definitely treat it like that. They're not unique snowflakes. You don't have emotional attachment to server 001 because it has your favorite version of Linux, for example. That's not needed. You
Yeah.
shouldn't treat them at least that way.
Old version of CentOS, maybe. Right?
Yeah, could be. I mean, I talked to some like veterans in the field, and they're like, "Yeah, I used to do COBOL. I still love it. I wish I had a mainframe at home." So could be, but that's the whole point. You really focus on the. You want to empower the core concepts of, in this case, the Microsoft Cloud, Azure, and it is not about uniqueness. It's about scale, operating at scale. So your naming convention needs to focus on that. And because it's at scale, it needs to cater, in my opinion, automation and not the human factor. So a name should be as logical build up as possible, making it slightly more difficult to read. But that's not a problem, because there's actually a solution for this. But a lot of architects, engineers kind of forget this. That's tagging. We can generically have 50 tags on every resource, and if I'm not mistaken, the limit of a tag is 4096 characters. So just
I don't
correct
know.
again, chat, if there's somebody
Mm.
who recently ran into the limit and can correct me, please do. But it is really big. It's not like 14 characters that we're talking about. So it's astronomically larger, and we can, and this is what I'm trying to show here. We can filter on tags in the same way we can filter on the names, or actually even better, because we can create combinations. And this is what you see here. We can create a visual summary view based on tags. We can set it up much easier. So, and tags are mutable. So if your department changes, you have a tag called department. That's fine. I mean, the only thing you have to keep in mind, if you change it, you need to include it in your financial reporting, your FinOps solution, because as soon as you change the tag, it counts as a new one. So if you change the halfway through your financial scope, I assume that's probably a year, you're going to lose half of the data. So that's the only thing you have to take care of with regards to tags. And you can set them up as you want. You can change them as you want. You can iterate them with your organization. If your organization merges, fuses, separates from another organization, is bought or buys another organization, you can combine that into tags. And the names, those stay forever. And those are for automation in this case. So jumping into the actual naming convention, and this is one of my former colleagues, he came up with the idea when I explained it to him. So this is something called a matryoshka. It's stacking doll, an East European stacking doll. So Yevhen, thanks again for the image. If you're listening, he generated the image for me for the blog post. Because originally I called this a size-wise approach, which is in line with the metric system. I know we talked about American naming convention, but this is where we go back to Europe with the metric system. And the setup is basically start with your largest definition and build up to the smallest. That way you can iterate with your code, loop through different aspects without having to create again on top of the exceptions that we just talked about based on the question that we just had. We don't have to add again additional exceptions, like with storage account you can't use hyphens, because you can simply iterate. You iterate always from the largest object and go smaller until you run out. You don't really need to modify anything for this automation wise.
So would that be? I'm thinking about it. Would an example. Would that be resource, for example, resource group, because you need to name your resource group. So RG hyphen name of the app, usually short, hyphen name of the environment, right? Stage,
Mhm.
prod, dev, ACC for acceptance or anything like that. And then
So
later on, you have like unique identifier if you have multiple of the same things, or
so almost.
okay.
Let's just jump in into example because we have it here. So logically, this is what it would look like. So what's your biggest object normally? It's not the resource group. Resource group is to organize the resource group resources together that belong together based on, for example, a version release, etc. So your biggest object is actually Microsoft calls this a workload in the Microsoft terminology, right? In the cloud adoption framework, well architected framework. So this is your on. We, by the way, just ignore the platform in this case because platform has its own naming convention. We do need to separate the responsibilities here a bit. So when your team, you're working on an application, what's the biggest thing? Is either the name of the application or the service domain slash workload that application or service is part of. The second one is usually your environment. A third one is the application or its component. Then goes the resource. Well, we have many of the same resource. So resource is also, and I'll show you in a second, um, has a random number or follow number to it, and then the sub resource. So that's how it should set up. But let's jump into practice. So let's say we have a workload called digital solutions. So this is the biggest doll in our case. And the environment that is going to run on is production. And that digital solution workload has a payment processing or a one of the examples that I use is a digital receipt service. So that would be the third doll. And this environment is not very cloud friendly yet. So it uses virtual machines. So then that virtual machine is one of the, let's say, 5 or 6 virtual machines that run the payment processing. So then you put in the virtual machine, and every virtual machine has their own, in this case, example, network interface or a drive. So you add those there as well. So
Hmm.
this is how you would fill in, go from workload, service domain, environment, application component to making it a bit more clear. So now that we have logically described this, we can put it into practice. And let me just open this up. So this is what it would look like. And I'm turning it slightly upside down to make a pyramid. Workload, the biggest one, environment second, application or component third, resource fourth, sub resource last. So that would mean that we have a disk, a virtual machine, a payment processing application, digital solution. We've seen that with the dolls.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Can I? Yeah,
Oh.
I'll zoom in on this one. So in our case, we have a acronym called DGS for digital solutions because we want to not write it out. It's never going to fit. The environment, we decided on a single letter environment in this case. It's a P. Our payment processing applications PPA. Virtual machine, we take the Microsoft abbreviation that we already talked about, and we simply add a number. Usually, three digit is more than enough. I rarely see more than 999 resources of the same type in the same resource group in the same region or even in the same subscription, depending on the resource type. And then the sub resource in this case is a disk. So that's how we bring it together. So how does that look? This is basically the filled in version of that. So we have a VM called DGSP PPA VM001. Our area, workload, environment, application, resource, instance. And that VM has a disk and it has a network card, a network interface. So how does that add? We simply add the disk, again, 001, NIC 001. And here you see the double stacked doll actually. One is the actual VM in this case is compartmentalized of those dolls, those Matroska dolls, but each resource is again stacked on top of the other one as well. In case a NIC or a disk would have something else, you could theoretically make it even bigger, assuming your resource allows for it.
Very good.
So
Yeah, I really
in
like
much
it.
in less much in organizations that are still like at the entry point of going to cloud maturity, base level maturity, this can get quite some frustration, or so you can get quite some pushback with regards to okay, we went from a VM called just let me give you an example on a notepad. So big solution, for example, prod VM uh, payment. And yeah, so this would be something that they used in a data center, and they have to go to something like this. This is a quite a jump, especially for the operations guys. They're like, yeah, I can't read this. This is mumbo jumbo. So first step here is, okay, guys, have you used tags? And sometimes that helps. And in some organizations, they're like, yeah, nope, we're not going to use them. While tags are actually more powerful because, like I said, if you have multiple tags, you can combine the search definition on tags and saying, I want this tag, this value, this tag, this value, and combine them. So you can make a cross-functional search results on tags. So it's actually more powerful than just going through the name. But yeah, this is where my experiences with regards to pushback comes in, is because this is not accepted. And
On
yeah,
computer name, right? So you have the resource name of the VM, but that VM also has a name within the operating system, right? And within the network from a DNS perspective, and so on and so forth, right? So will you then use the same name that as the as
I love
what
the
is on
question.
screen now, or will you then go for a different computer name because you can do that, and do you tag
So
that, or do you add that as a display name?
this
What
is I'm gonna give you the best consultancy answer.
it
People hate
depends.
from me. It depends. Yeah, it depends on how you design it. If you on how you think of this. So let's say my network is provided to me by my platform team. That's why I mentioned the separation. Then the VNet in this case is provided to me by the platform team. So they are going to name it for me because it's important for them in their ownership. Then you can ask yourself, okay, but in this case, in my environment, I have a satellite network. I will create it myself. Thank you, platform team, but you don't fit my needs. I will create it myself. This happens as well. Very mature workload teams want to maintain as much as possible. I mean, I think you have the shirt, or one of our MVP colleagues. You build it, you run it. Multiple have it. I'm pretty sure. So thinking from that perspective, you build it, you run it. Highly advanced team. They want to maintain their network. Then you need to ask yourself, is this VNet part of my solution? So in this case, I have a workload and an area, and I have an environment and an application. Is this network purely specific for this application? Then you could definitely name it like that and add it here. If it's a generic network that is going to be used by multiple workloads or multiple applications, I would strongly advise at the moment to use a single network for multiple environments from a separation of duty, separation of concerns, from a security standpoint. You do not want to have production data being able to directly transport it to your development environment. Simply separate that personally from how to separate resources, but we're getting there in a slightly different topic. So if that's not the case, then this name is going to be completely different, which is fine, because you're going to probably not put that network or that VNet in the same resource group. Definitely not the same resource group, because it's not gonna be part of your release cycle for this specific piece. Maybe not even in the same subscription, depending on how you want to separate your concerns from an architecture point of view. So this is where it depends. It depends on how you modularize everything in your architecture.
Yeah, makes sense. And it goes back to it depends. But you mentioned one thing that triggered me, and that was responsibility or ownership or accountability. I'm mixing up the terms, but
Shared
what you basically
responsibility. No.
no, but you want to sometimes you want a certain team to be able to own a certain component as
Mhm.
well, and that they
Yeah.
can influence the outcome instead of you dictating the terms, right? It's like
Yeah.
a give and take. Anyway, different topic, different day, but
We can have
yeah.
a separate chat on how do you how my view and my experience on how to
Mm,
create shared responsibility, what Microsoft does with as a vendor, as a cloud
mm,
vendor, how that can be done between a platform team or a shared team that operates, let's say, API management. That's a good example usually, because you don't, while it is possible to create an API management instance for every application workload you have, generally you want one centric place where you provide your
mm.
APIs to your internal clients or to your partners, to whatever your solution is. So you're going to share it. So how do you do that? Or how you can, for example, provide something as a service. So in high maturity teams, you want to make sure that the brain drain doesn't happen. So you interact with each other as much as possible through service. So if you have a platform team, it should provide you with a service to, for example, networking, because they create the hub spoke and make it super safe with the Azure firewall in the middle, etc., etc. So how do you deal with that responsibility? We can definitely have a separate topic on that. That's one of my passions.
Nice, 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 nice. All right, so Jeff, just to check, I don't necessarily have a hard stop at 6. I don't know about you.
No, me neither. I mean,
Okay, so then we can just go on, and then eventually, because
yeah.
I don't want to miss out on the display name
No,
feature, right?
definitely not. And I don't want to hurry into that one, but I'll
Okay.
try to at least
No, no,
before
we can
6.
just then we
Let's.
can just proceed, right? We can just proceed. Luckily, this is recorded on YouTube. Any case, if you need to drop and you want to watch it later, you
You
can view it
fall
on
asleep.
YouTube. Fall asleep. Oh yeah. Well, I'm having fun, so
Me too. So
No, but it's recorded. It's on YouTube as well. So we'll just continue.
cool. I see a hand somewhere.
A hand. Oh yeah. Another.
I
Oh,
think I
Samir.
put.
Yeah. Hi, Samir. This one you mean or not?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Samir is a colleague of mine, and we work in
Cool.
the same
Hi.
team. So
Awesome.
it's nice to see all these familiar faces.
So is that a question or is this just hi?
Yeah, Samir, you have something, or can you unmute yourself? Oh no, you're not here. No. Otherwise,
Yeah, you're used to speaking to him daily.
all right, man.
If Samir, if you have a question, please write it out. I'll try to answer it as much as possible. But in the meantime, so there is a second version of this naming setup, and you probably, for the ones that saw it, this is when we deal with subscriptions as environments. When we deal with subscriptions as environments, we can separate things out on a slightly higher level. If you have, I don't see this very often, but there are strategic decisions where they say, okay, well, your workload has to be inside a resource group. And this is more in line with the example that you mentioned, Robin, earlier with your naming convention.
Mm.
Oh, no question. Good. Hi. In that case, you can shuffle things slightly more around. We get to that. But by the way, this is the example that we just did with DGS, PPA, VM, NIC 1, NIC 2. Talking about the managed identity, this is, by the way, I will adapt. I will change this because this is before Microsoft updated their documentation. I had to choose it our own. So this is a very, very nice thing to come back to. So I'll definitely adapt this to ID because I want to be in line. But back then we called it MI. And this is how you can set up. And you can see if you look to the Azure portal, it becomes very clean and very transparent what resources are grouped together. Because a NIC doesn't have much value without a VM. Although I do see sometimes organizations where I open up the resource group and I see a single NIC. It's like, where's the rest of it? Yeah, we deleted it, but this one remained. So immediately it's like, okay, how good is your naming convention? Because if you had a good deletion loop that is standardized in this naming convention, you're gonna have a script that's gonna delete everything that is named like this and has a trailing whatever behind it. That way you 100% sure no, okay, I'm gonna delete the whole thing, whatever is part of this VM. Again, it's something it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because if you're gonna do it that way, be prepared that you're gonna delete everything. So if you cheated a bit on your naming convention and added some additional components that are not really part of that VM, you're gonna delete them as well with this. So this is where the standardization comes in. If you pick a standard, stick with it.
It's interesting though that you, because I did it like the naming convention we are discussing today. I did it like that, or something similar, where then the resource type was at the end, right? So I also had these environmental and the identifier, the abbreviation of the workload name, and so on and so forth, and I ended up with the VM at the end. But I'm looking at my my recently deployed resources in my my Azure test environment, and now I have like the smallest. So my Matrushka, probably pronounced it the wrong way, but mine starts with the small one and then ends up with the big one, basically, or somewhere in between. So it's
You
interesting.
have some work laid out for you. By the way, there are two things that I want to touch as well, that we don't want to add into the name, which is partially there, but not exactly. I'll get to that in a second. So imagine you have a design decision somewhere from your team that says, well, I don't want the subscription as an environment. You need to shuffle this around, and it becomes a little bit easier. So with a subscription, okay, I need to fix some stuff. I see. With the subscription as an environment, this is, for example, how you could name a subscription. Although a subscription is quite a unique resource, as everybody who works with Azure knows, because it has a unique identifier and it has a name that we can consistently change. But for the purpose of consistency, I would put the name as well, like this. And definitely the resource group, the same thing, RG001. And this is in line with what our fellow MVPs did I think you said on Azure Lowlands, right?
Yeah.
Is my next resource group for this application will be 002, 003, 004, 005. And just tag them and say 001 is this, 002 is this. And when you start using it, you're going to get used to, as a human, you're going to get used to it, and everybody will know RG001 is this. And if there's a person who is not used to it, simply go read the documentation or filter it on tags, because if you want to find something, make sure tagging is there and is done correctly. And with the resources environment, I'm not going to go through the whole detail, but you switch things around. As you can see, you put your environment here, and this has to do because you want to separate your environment becomes your resource group, and because of that, it's no longer the second largest DOL in the stack, because you want to still organize them. So you're going to organize all the resource groups together that are part of this workload. Then you want to organize them by application, and then you want to organize them by environment, which makes more sense, because if you look from the management group perspective all the way down, you're actually at the lowest level of a resource container. I'm not talking about like containers, but a resource container, which is a management group, a subscription, or a resource group. And because of that, you need to switch them around to make sense. And you'll end up with this, but it's very similar. You just switch two things around and you're pretty much there, and you'll end up with that setup as well. Couple of things. I love the single letter acronyms for environments. I rarely get to use them because most of the operators really strongly feel towards the 3-letter acronyms for the environments. But whatever you go for, just stick with it. Yeah, I've seen 2 letters as well in some organization. Just be
consistency, right? What we already discussed in the commandments. So it doesn't really matter, right? You can even give them Pokemon names if you would like to,
Numbers.
right? Or numbers or randomly generated IDs or anything,
Make it
right?
very difficult. Characters from a different.
Oh, yeah, UTF-8 somewhere
Yeah,
somewhere far in the coding scheme. No, but
exactly.
um, or what I've seen as well is completely random strings with certain characters, and then use tags to find
Yeah,
what you're looking for, right? But then sometimes you troubleshoot. And you're like, what am I looking at here? Is this indeed the right key vault or not? Is this
yeah.
indeed the right resource? Yeah.
Well, if you do that correctly through code, you should be able to get the tags relatively easy, so you can verify what it is. And when I troubleshoot and iterate through resources, I make sure that I output the tags always. But this is my best practice because I'm used to this naming convention as a setup. So, two things that I would advise against personally to putting in the name, and it's kind of there as well, but it's there as instance ID. So the first one is individually put the resource type there. So I have it here with like VM001 to make this resource instance more easily iteratable and still kind of relatable for a human without going completely to the GUID part. But I did see a lot of naming convention where this is just like a separate object by its own. For example, like you mentioned at the start, RG. So why is that the case? One of the Because we want to keep the naming convention as short as possible and as clean as possible, we want to avoid putting information here which is already there. And so this is my environment that I used for my latest post and are my dabbling into AI. Um, and you can see the resource type is already given for me here. So if I would open Azure, the portal interface, it's already there. So why do I need it in my name? The only reason I have it in my name is to um, make it easier to align with the follow numbers. So it will give me smaller types of follow numbers. And if I would like organize it, as you can see, by type, it starts to make sense as well in this case. But don't if you're not going for this, either completely remove it or don't use it because it's already visible here. And the same thing if you go through scripting, for example, you do with PowerShell, you get I believe, five default properties of any object. One of them is type. It's always there. So why add it explicitly to your name if you already have it? That's one. And the second one, and this goes really against the Microsoft best practice here, is I mean, the post has been updated recently, but this picture's, I think, 5 years old, maybe older. And if you would go all the way to the feedback page on GitHub, sorry. For this, you would actually see some fellow engineers and architects that suggested to update this picture as well. There are some suggestions, some pull requests for that, but I don't know why it never got approved. And this part is West US. So again, the region, the location is already provided for me here. So why do I need to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters to which is, if my smallest number is still correct, 14, is almost half of my name for just a region, which I have already here in my in my portal as a standard field, and the same thing in automation. I get the same location as a default property. And on top of that, some resources can be failed over to a different region. So what happens with those resources if you're going to fail them over, in some cases permanently move them to a different region for whatever reason? The name is immutable. So you're going to have something weird. What are you going to do? You're going to add a tag with a description saying, I'm sorry, this name is wrong. What are you going to do with your automation? If you highly automated environment, you need to have an exception for this specifically. So how are you going to handle that specific exception? You'll need to almost hard code like either a resource group name or add somewhere a tag or a hidden tag. Hint, we're going to move to the next subject.
Well,
To solve this.
before we move on, I was looking at my own portal and I'm like, oh man, I'm your story makes so much sense and it's much better than what I'm consistent though, so I can share my screen if we're interested. But let's stick with your screen. But I basically did what Microsoft says in that picture, right? So start with the resource first and so on and so forth, and then I have an ID at the end. And what I do with VMs, for example, I have nick, VM name, or disk, VM name, right? But then all the things that all the sub resources that are part of that main resource are scattered in my list. They're not underneath each other because that's not how the sorting works, right? So that already stood out. I do have one question about, because I do use the location, but I use abbreviations, right? So WEU for West Europe,
Yeah,
and
so it's not this.
EU. No, so it's not completely that, and I have that in my Terraform code, and I have a map where I can then write it out completely, and then my map, I go into my map, and then I pull the abbreviation out of it. But what, for example, at one of my assignments, we had a subscription per environment. So we had a staging, development subscription, and so on and so forth, right? And we have multiple AKS clusters across multiple regions in the same subscription, right? So then, of course, the location is in the metadata, right? It's one of the properties of your resource. But would you then add the location to the name, so then you can keep all your cluster names the same, but the only thing that changes is the location that you have in there? Or how would you deal with that?
I would simply name them with a follow number. So your cluster AKS001, AKS002,
Okay.
and whether one is in like Sweden Central and the other one is in US, it shouldn't matter for you, right? If you want to know, if you have a use case where your logic needs to know where it is, you're going to retrieve that as a property because it's already there.
Yeah.
When you do get AZ resource, you get that information already. So what would be, I might be mistaken here because I think there are some edge cases where you could add this, but let me ask you this. This is the same question I would ask any like engineer or architect. What added value would it give you to add it there?
Well, I'm thinking about my cube context, right? So then I can easily see locally to what cluster and what region. Otherwise, I need to remember if I have like 10 clusters across 10 different regions, and I'm not using Fleet Manager or anything like that. So I need to go into every cluster to check certain things or whatever, right?
So
then I need to remember that 5 is, for example, Sweden Central, and 1 is here in Amsterdam, right? Like,
so if you have that use case where you say, okay, my engineers need to go in for the CTL for the context in this case, and that helps them because we have a huge amount, that's fine. This is one of your exceptions that you can agree with the team and say, well, we do this like this, and this is our exception to the size-wise one, or in this case, it's actually an addition. It's an addition to the size-wise because it makes sense for us, and that's the biggest take here as well. I'm explaining this from a holistic point of view, but there are so many ways of implementing and using it. I mean, if you use Rancher, you probably won't have this problem, right?
I don't know.
Because you should use them. You abstract the multiple clusters together, right? There are different tools, and maybe Rancher is not the best example here.
No, but I get what you're saying, right? It's basically, okay, you have a certain standard, a way of thinking, which is almost perfect, right? So the perfect naming convention, or the perfect naming convention way of thinking does exist, right?
Yeah,
where you go from big to small. You thought about, okay, what if your subscription instead of your resource group defines the environment, and then you have a logical explanation of reorganizing certain naming convention components. And then sometimes you need to deviate because it makes more sense in a certain context, and then you just, okay, you record that or document that as an exception with an explanation, decision log, whatever,
exactly.
and you'll just move on.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's no, I mean, like I said, Lord of the Rings is the only one that rules them all. There's no such thing in, at least I haven't seen it yet in any cloud environment that has the whole idea is at scale and distributed. So because of that, the number of variations that you introduce into every environment, this almost like lottery tickets. They're going to be unique. So there are always cases where you say, well, this makes sense for us. The most important thing, though, is like what you mentioned, is make sure that this is visible and documented and agreed on. So if you're not there anymore as an individual or as a team, that whoever picks it up is like, why? That question needs to be answered. That question needs to be answered. Why did they do it this way? Well, we did it because at that time, Microsoft didn't have an abbreviation, and we didn't have tools to abstract all the AKS clusters. Just again an example, to abstract all the interfaces, CTL from every AKS cluster, and maintain them and at an abstraction level where I don't have to connect to every individual one of them. And we had 15 of them, so that's why we did it. And now we have only 5, and we have all these tools. So when we're going to reintroduce this, we're going to rebuild the environment, or we're going to migrate, we're going to reiterate on it, we're going to change it, and we're going to change this into this. That's also an important thing. You're going to iteratively change things. That's how this naming convention came up. And I'm sure in a couple of years' time, there might be some different ways that the Azure portal works or the way the automation works. And we're going to end up with hopefully another of these recordings, because I'm enjoying myself a lot here, where we're going to discuss why and how we changed it.
All right, nice. Okay. So, hidden display name tag.
Yeah. So one of the things, imagine we finally get this set up here that we have right now, but your ops team or whatever team says, well, we still feel this is not enough for us. We don't want this. How can you convince your client or from who your environment is to still go with this? Because most of us know, whether you go for exactly this naming convention or slightly a different variation of this, that when that team is going to mature into the correct maturity level for operating at scale, they're going to be like, shit, we should have chosen this maybe 1 year ago, or 2 years ago, or 6 months ago, or 3 years ago. So how can you give them a little bit more to hold on to before they get used to this? And that is actually something very cool. And I ran into this completely by accident. And that's why we have, what if I told you, renameable Azure resource display names are available. I actually ran into this while doing some tags. And what happens is I wrote last year, post is, I was looking on Microsoft documentation for tags and how to set up tags, etc. Let's see if I can get the actual post here, hidden title tag. So I can actually show it to you here. So the structure of Azure dashboards. I was looking on how can I show those ugly VM, non-human readable, like my VM here. This is the best example ever. But imagine we did the naming convention here, and we post this dashboard somewhere on a big monitor. Whoever walks by from the operations needs to know what it is, right? They need to know what it is. Here, the human factor becomes very important, because if there's a VM that is in the red, or whatever resource is in the red, and it's their the business critical application, they need to know. And not everybody will know based on the automation name. So how can we do that? And what I ran into, I'm just going to open it again because that makes life easier with scrolling, is there's something called hidden title. And so what is this? Is a hidden tag. Basically, whatever you do with regards to tagging in Azure, if you put hidden dash in front of it, it will be not visible. So if you want to put some metadata for your automation, schedules, whatever, for your workbooks or something like that, you can add hidden in front of it. And unless you specifically request this or retrieve it through automation, you won't be able to see. And I ran into a special tag for dashboards called hidden title. And what it does, it actually displays whatever you put there as part of the title. So what I want to do is just show it to you right now. I'm just going to choose one of my resources. And it doesn't have any tags. So if I use hidden title, and let's go back to the original post, and let's call it, where do we have it here? So payment processing. Let's just use that one. And I put the value payment processing here, and then we apply. And it takes quite some time to do. That display name will be visible in the Azure portal and in some other areas as well. And I'm just going to show you the blog post in the meantime. I think it takes a couple of minutes to actually be. Oh, there we go. It's actually visible right now. So what you can see here is what I just put in the hidden title tag is visible here. So in case you still want to go with the proper maturity level automation focused name, which goes into cattle, and still give that cattle a pet name, at least for a transition period, this is the best way, what I've seen so far. And it does have some limitation because it's not visible and not joined everywhere. But this is, when I showed this to a couple of clients and a couple of teams, they're like, oh my God, this is exactly what we need to convince our ops team to still go with this. So
I still remember when you showed it to me on Microsoft Ignite in the Netherlands, right? We
Yeah.
were playing around a little bit. I was showing some radio stuff on my machine, and then you said, you know about the we were talking about a naming convention and doing this
Yeah.
session actually. So the idea was created there, and then you said, you know about the hidden tag or the display name tag? I'm like, sorry, what? Come again? I'm like, no, look at this, and then we added it to one of the resources. It popped up, and I was like, what? Why
Why
is
didn't I
this?
know this? Yes, this is when I read the article as well. So it's the reference for structure of Azure dashboard, and then tag. I read like hidden title. What is this? And it literally says it here. This tag gives you a way to have renamable display name for your dashboard. So what happens? I don't have a dashboard ready for this, but you can test it out in your own environment. That VM that we just saw all the way up here, if we give it payment process, you would see it actually here. And that makes it very cool. So the purpose is for dashboards, but we can use it in other areas as well. And I did some application, like I said, no cat. We can give our pets cattle or the other way around. And I've done an update because I got a lot of feedback from people like, "Oh my God, this is awesome! Can you tell me more about how it works?" So there is some limitations to it, and you can look it up. So if I would go into the here and I would say payment processing, as you can see, the resource is there, but the tag is not visible here. But if you mouse over, you can see the third option name. It's called payment processing actually here. So with regards to search, I would love this to be visible here as well between brackets, but that's not the case. So that's the limitation. You really need to mouse over it. As you can see here as well, the name is visible, but you don't see it anywhere. And a second one, oh yeah, here with payment images, etc. Second limitation here is you can't filter on it. So if you've added a tag, if you want to filter on that tag, it will not show up because it's a hidden tag. So if I go back to this resource and I go back to tags, it's not visible here. So if I would go to, let me duplicate tags. You can see all kinds of tags here, but you won't see the hidden tag here because it's hidden as well in this case. So that's a limitation on it as well, and you can't get the tag by going get AZ tags, because get AZ tags is the PowerShell, or the, I think Azure CLI has a similar command for this, I'm pretty sure, for actual tags functionality. But how you can get it is by getting the resource .tags, or get AZ resource, or get AZ VM, and then reading out to the tags. Then it becomes visible, and then you can see the tag as well. So there is some limitation to this way of working, but I think, in at least in my opinion, it's a good way of, and this is another example that I used. I think this is the one I showed maybe to you or to somebody else as well. This is a good transition approach between going for the full approach with the completely automated name, basically the cattle approach, and the pet approach. And the limitations are very acceptable if you use it as a transition in this case.
And what if I want to get rid of it, or I want to change it?
So if you want to change it, so we can take this one, you simply add hidden value, my new value, and it will be overwritten.
Oh, okay.
No,
Or
I don't have access to this resource.
Okay, so you can override it by recreate the hidden title tag, or hidden value in this case, which then will override hidden title.
Let's see. So this is one of them, and see tags. Let's see if I can. You simply, what happens is you re-add the same tag with the same name, and it overrides it by default.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, not with the same name, but with a different value.
Yeah.
Let's see if this account has access to. Yeah, I need to figure out which resource group I just used as an example. I think it's this one. Yeah, this is the one. So let me give it a go here. So tags, again, you don't see it. Hidden title. I hope I typed it correctly. My new value.
And if you leave it empty, then it will just remove it, or?
Yes.
Okay.
It will go away.
All right.
And that's basically the best way of, and it takes a bit. I was surprised when we just added it, and it was so fast. So sometimes this takes a couple of minutes, but this is how to do it. You can also get the resource and its tag properties and just remove it from there to automation. Same thing. So modification of it is exactly the same way you use other tags. Because if you have like let's say a department tag, and you re-add the department tag again with a different value, it gets overwritten because it's a key value pair. Behind the scenes, it's a key value pair where you're just gonna re-add the same key, a different value with the same key.
Interesting. So, and what I didn't know as well is if you add hidden in front, hidden hyphen, and then whatever you want. So you can even, if you have a certain tag you want to use for, I don't know, so from a FinOps perspective, where you want.
Don't know FinOps perspective. Sorry to interrupt here, but I'm excited on the subject. So, if you have a FinOps report, it will probably not read this hidden tag because it reads the tags from the tag functionality in Azure. So for that, it probably won't work unless you have something in between that would retrieve stuff for you, some logic. Where this is very useful for is automation aspect. So we used it in one of my project, in one of our teams that I was part of, one of the clients, to schedule reboots for VMs in a way that it's not hidden information, but it's not something that we want to have out there and have people possibly modify unintentionally. And there are more things, because you can add inside a tag, you can add a JSON file, etc. You can obfuscate. Again, this is not security wise, it's obfuscate. It's just for the ease of use. So when you use it, I would definitely consider for your environment, is this sensitive information? If yes, you're not hiding, you're not like securing it, you're obfuscating it, you're literally hiding it. So don't put it there. But if there's some logic script, logic settings that you want to add, that you can read or parse or filter on, similar way that you do tags as well, go ahead and add hidden in front of it, because it's a tag that is there for automation and logic purposes, which doesn't add value in being visible in a portal or being visible when you retrieve it through a FinOps report and stuff like that.
Makes sense. Perfect. All right.
Cool.
Shall we wrap it up? Do you have anything else up your sleeve that you would like to discuss?
Normally, yes, but I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, I get that.
I guess the same is for you as well. No, if we want to chat on a couple of different topics, we should definitely do it separately.
Absolutely.
I assume there are no more questions for now.
I checked, so no. Okay. Lots of thumbs up. We averaged around 15 to 20 viewers on LinkedIn, so that was not bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's wrap it up. So where can people find you?
In the Netherlands. Well, you can definitely check out my blog, which is devjev.nl. I am quite responsive on LinkedIn, so look me up based on my name on LinkedIn, or if you're going to go to my blog, it's there. I have GitHub where I'm active. I have my own, but there's with a couple of one fellow MVP, a couple of engineers, we're trying to share some stuff on channel called the Cloud Explorers. So that's a GitHub area, and we have a YouTube channel called the Cloud Explorers, where we post some stuff as well. So if you're interested in finding out more, the blog post is the way to go. If you have questions, stuff you want to reach out, I'm happy to chat on stuff. Do that on LinkedIn, and for additional interactive content, YouTube. Sweet. I'm not very active on X these days, so I do have one, but I kind of levitated towards LinkedIn for some reason.
Awesome. Then thank you, Jev.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I'll be streaming more under my own name and profile on LinkedIn. So next week will be another one. Next week, Wednesday, same time, same channel. And Jev, I will definitely take up your offer on streaming a little bit more, because I really have fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the fun again.
All right, guys and girls, see you later.
Yes. Cheers. Bye. Enjoy your dinner if you haven't. Bye.